If you happen to read the Friday email this week, you'll know that I'm eagerly awaiting Thanksgiving. Our home has just not felt much like home over the past 14 months that my partner Joe's been working in Honolulu, but my sister and brother-in-law and niece are coming, and they'll bring that sense of home with them. Memories of home, for better or for worse, are what Thanksgiving, I imagine, stirs up for most of us. I know that many of you have raw memories of home, and I'm sorry about that. Home should be a place of plenty of food and especially plenty of love. Mine are mostly good memories. Thanksgiving stirs up a lot of nostalgia. My mother was a good Midwestern cook and put that Thanksgiving dinner on the table. And my father sat there and told corny dad jokes at Thanksgiving dinner. But he had this thing he would always say at the end of the meal if someone offered him a second helping of pumpkin pie. My sufficiency is suffoncified. Any more would be an obnoxious superfluity to that which I have already consumed. He knew how to say no thank you with so much flair. In today's reading from Deuteronomy, which is the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible text assigned for Thanksgiving Day, the Israelites are on their way home. And you know the story. God sends Moses, tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. There's the plagues, there's the exodus from Egypt, the parting of the Red Sea, and then 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. If you haven't read the story, you've seen the movie. Well, now at last, those freed slaves are on the edge of the promised land. They're about to go home, and it will be a good land. When I read a passage like this from Deuteronomy, I'm struck with two things. First of all, how very foreign it is, but also how very familiar it is. It's foreign because technology has, of course, dramatically changed our lives from what it was 3,000 years ago, or even 400 years ago when the Pilgrims came. But what really separates us from them, I believe, is our connection with the land. Virtually all of those ancient Israelites were farmers. In fact, pretty much everyone who has lived in the history of humanity up until this point in time have been farmers. I'm curious, is there anyone with us today who is a farmer? Kind of, yeah. Anyone? Okay, there's a couple. Keep your hands raised. How many of you grew up on a farm? Quite a few more. Keep your hands raised. How many of you have a parent who grew up on a farm? I can raise mine now. How many of you had a grandparent who grew up on a farm? Look at that, how it multiplied over generations. You can put your hands down. In the US in 1790, 90% of the population, the labor force, made their living off of farming. In 1900, it had dropped to 38%. Today, do you know what the percentage of the US population that farms is? 2%. The Bible was written to an agrarian people, people who knew the land, people who knew where their food came from and what it took to grow it and the labor it took to produce it. The only agricultural work that I have done over the past year is to go out on my balcony and snip leaves off of a basil plant. Farmer, environmentalist, and essayist Wendell Berry writes about the consequences of our disconnection to the land. Most of us get all the things that we need by buying them. Most of us know only vaguely, if at all, where those things come from and the damage that's done to the environment and their production. We're almost entirely dependent on an economy of which we are almost entirely ignorant. The provenance of not only the food we buy in the store, but the chemicals, the fuels, the metals, and other materials necessary to grow it, harvest it, transport it, process it, and package it, all of that is mostly a mystery to us. To know the full economic history of just a head of supermarket cauliflower would take a great deal of investigation. And living as we do in an economy that's almost completely interdependent globally, we're inevitably put into a position of ignorance and irresponsibility. We've abdicated the critical questions about caring for the earth, God's good creation, to a global market. A market which proposes no limits on either supply or demand. Our disconnection from the land is having a dire consequence on a global scale. But our ancestors, even just as far back as our grandparents, they knew the land. Everything they used, everything they could see, everything they used and everything they destroyed, they could see. They knew where it came from, and they knew where it went, so they cared for the land. Well, the land that the Israelites are about to enter is a good land. Notice what Moses says about it. They'll find wheat and barley, olives, figs, pomegranates, honey, running water. It's the Mediterranean diet. And there's iron and copper, good humble metals from which pots and pans and farm implements are made to cultivate the wheat and break the bread. The diet in the Promised Land initially is mostly vegetarian, plenty of grains, plenty of fruits. And the promise is that they will eat their fill of the bread and bless the Lord for the good land that God has given them. That's God's dream for our world. And really, if you think about it, that's a pretty modest dream, isn't it? It's an achievable dream, a good land with enough good food and clean water for everyone. But then there comes this warning, and this is where I find that the ancient Israelites had a lot in common with us. After a while of living in the Promised Land, they will be tempted with the amnesia of affluence, when they're able to build fine houses to live in. Their vegetarian diet of wheat and olives has given way to steak and lamb chops, and those humble metals of iron and copper have been replaced by luxury goods of silver and gold. And instead of blessing the God who gave them the good land, they attribute their affluence and their success to themselves. They've forgotten God. They've forgotten that all that they are and all that they have is a gift. This isn't really a story about people living 3,000 years ago, is it? It's a story about us. And that's what makes Scripture so remarkably relevant in every generation. And our contemporary distance from the land has made it even more easy for us to forget God and to forget the land. The wheat, the olives, the pomegranates, the honey, the steak, and the lamb chops, all of that is found on grocery shelves for us to buy or on a menu for us to order. From childhood, we're taught to be consumers, seeking to satisfy the bottomless pit of desire. When I was in seminary, I've told you before that I worked at Marshall Field's. I was a men's clothier. God rest Marshall Field's soul. Now, this, of course, is the season when consumer capitalism begins to really heat up, right? It's without any sense of irony, we're sucked into spending lots of money on lots of junk to celebrate the birth of a baby born in poverty. But there was one thing that I and the other Fields associates at that time could always count on. Although the next day the store would open at the crack of dawn, on Thanksgiving Day we always knew that it would be closed and we could spend the day at home enjoying our families. We had some out-of-town visitors this weekend visiting from Chicago. It's my nephew's husband's parents. How many people can say that? My nephew's husband's parents. So they're visiting Chicago. They hadn't been here before, and I looked up the hours of what's now the Macy's Walnut Room in case they wanted to go there. And I found this announcement on their website. Indulge in a new tradition. Enjoy your Thanksgiving feast at Macy's Walnut Room, Thursday, November 23rd, 5 to 9 p.m. You can now have your turkey dinner and shop at Macy's, all on Thanksgiving Day. And they're oxymoronically calling it a new tradition. We live in this complex world of market forces that are designed to exploit our tendency toward greed, one of the 7 deadly sins. How can we extricate ourselves from it? As Christians, what can we do? Well, we can start by heeding the same warning that Moses gave to those Israelites before they entered the Promised Land, the good land. When you built your comfortable homes with all the modern conveniences, when you're able to afford steak and lamb chops for dinner and gold and silver jewelry because your investments have multiplied, don't forget God. Remember the one from whom all blessings flow and give thanks. But you know what? It's not just enough for us to remember and give thanks. Duke Divinity School professor William Willimon writes, "We need the sort of character that's able to look at the world in all it has to offer and at certain key moments simply say, 'Thank you, but I'm satisfied.'" It's become downright morally heroic to be the sort of person who can say, "No thanks, I have more than I could possibly ever hope to use." Or, "Yes, dear, we could afford it, but we love you so much, we don't need to buy you that car. Wendell Berry encourages us to use the considerable power that we have as consumers, the power of choice, the power to choose to buy or not to buy. And the standard by which we choose must be the health of the community. And that means not just us, but the neighbors we share it with, the neighbors down the street, all the humans and other creatures who live with us. Now, as urban dwellers, I know that it's difficult for us to remain connected to the land. But we can start small, and these are some simple and obvious steps. Instead of going shopping on Black Friday, go outside. Go for a walk by the lake. Walk through that park that's near your home, or walk around your neighborhood. Look up at the sky. Take a deep breath of that fresh air that is God's free gift to you. And when you turn on that tap water, give thanks for that blessing, that a miracle of fresh water you have to drink. Make a list of everything that you take for granted. Eat a simple meal of wheat and barley, olives and figs, and give thanks for the farmers who are still connected to the land. Gratitude doesn't always come naturally. Gratitude is a habit that needs to be cultivated. And it's a habit that we need to cultivate for the sake of our own souls, for the sake of the planet. For us who live in 21st century America, who consume far, far more than we need, perhaps just as much as the habit of giving thanks, we need to cultivate the habit of learning to say thanks, but no thanks. My sufficiency is suffancified. Any more would be an obnoxious superfluity to that which I have already consumed.